think we both know this is where we go our separate ways.
Someday love will find you. Break those chains that bind you. One night will remind you. Oh, we touched and went our separate ways. If he ever hurts you, true love won't desert you. You know I still love you. Though we touched and went our separate ways.
I fully blame being exposed to Ada Wong in my formative years for my taste in women who emotionally want nothing to do with me and could very well kill me, and the new Separate Ways DLC perfectly recaptures that feeling.
I can hardly contain myself.
This might be a controversial take. I think Separate Ways actually did a lot of things better than the main game did. However, that being said, Separate Ways is almost a completely different experience from the original, whereas the original you had basically tread over the same ground as Leon. This Separate Ways has you play through the overwhelming majority of the 4 hours it took me to complete through brand new areas all crafted for Separate Ways with a mixture of areas from the original main game that didn't make it into the remake's main campaign. I'm going to talk about the things I like, the things that could have been better, and the things that I just didn't like, and then we're going to wrap it all up in a nice bow at the end and see where it stacks up in the series and with the original game. Apart from the main DLC, I'm also going to quickly go over the free Mercenaries update that was also added the same time as the Separate Ways DLC, which included Ada and Wesker, along with bonus outfits for Leon and Ada in Mercenaries, along with a new map. If you like what you're seeing at any point in this video, you should consider subscribing because I make content like this fairly regularly and cover all new Resident Evil material that's released. Now, if you aren't familiar with this DLC, no, it's not about your divorced parents getting back together. Like mine, they have permanently gone their separate ways. No, this expansion follows Ada Wong during the main events of Resident Evil 4, and if you aren't familiar with the main events of the game, you should go check out my other video where I cover the game in full. Kicking off the things I like, the Ganado that steals Leon's jacket is back, and this time you can sell it to the merchant who flirts with Ada mega hard.
It warms my heart to see you stop by, stranger.
And even goes out of his way to tell her he's been holding out on his other customer.
I reserved some items just for you. My other customer doesn't know about these.
What happened to bros before hoes? Heh bros before hoes, unless the hoes don't have clothes. Strange. Everything looks really great. I mean, really great. The time of day in the beginning especially looks even better than it does in the main game somehow. It does a way better job of giving it that old fall feeling that the original village had. The grapple hook has way more functionality besides just using it to navigate. It helps a lot in combat with doing long-range melee attacks, with the ability later on through a charm to even be able to grapple shields away. Almost feels like you're playing Titanfall at certain points. Wesker is way more prominent in the game and is actually in the field with Ada rather than sitting back in some super secret evil villain lair. Lewis also has a lot more scenes just like in the main story, and wow, just the opening scene of Lewis is just perfect. I'd say it's 10 out of 10 and would easily fit in the original game had it have been there. Just absolutely nailed the tone. Loved it. And I just want to say, this scene with Lewis right here perfectly encapsulates everything that was missing from the main story in this game, and this was my main problem with the main game, was the presentation. It lacked the humor and the charm of the original, but this one scene alone right here, and also a bunch of other scenes throughout the Separate Ways DLC, perfectly recapture that campy tone of the original, and I think if the main game had more of that, it would have been definitely way higher up, in my opinion. Ada also gets infected along with Leon this time, which is another major change, and her hallucinations actually play a huge role in the gameplay, which I would have liked to see more of in the main story as well, but I'm glad that it did make some appearance in the game. Her relationship with Leon is also definitely way more fleshed out now. In the original, anytime she's in a position to help Leon, she does, and I like that this carried over into Separate Ways. I didn't like how in the main remake story that it seemed like she just kind of treated him like a dog, but I think they corrected a lot of this in Separate Ways, and I think this is probably maybe how it should have been more in the main story. but guess I'm okay with it being saved for Separate Ways. They included a ton of areas that were absent from the main game, and this makes Separate Ways feel way better in terms of level design from the original. As I mentioned before, the game is about 4 to 5 hours long if you're taking your time with it, but you've also played a Resident Evil game before, so you kind of know what's going to happen, and you know what to do and where to go and whatnot. It's also an entire 2 extra chapters longer than the original Separate Ways. The unlockables are also awesome that you get for completing it. Ada, Lewis, and Wesker all get alternate costumes, with Ada getting a new take on her red dress and her outfit from the remake of 2. Throughout the game, you get a ton of weapons, all of which from the original came back. The shotgun is so nice, and it really feels like it has the kick of the original one, with a really nice, smooth, buttery spread. The explosive tip crossbow also makes a comeback and takes up an absurd amount of inventory space as it did before, but unlike the original, by the time you unlock it, you actually have time to use it. I mean, who even thought of that in the original? Yeah, we're gonna give the player an all-new weapon, an explosive tip crossbow, and the best part is, they're only gonna be able to use it for the last 3 levels of the 5 levels they have. Also, unlike the original, you can upgrade all of Ada's weapons. Overall, this just makes, if anything, the original DLC feel less complete, which I never even thought I'd ever say about a Resident Evil remake since the remake of the first game. I mean, every system, just like the main game, was completely fleshed out. New soundtrack is also absolutely beautiful. Ada's remix of the save theme is absolutely the best part of the new soundtrack between Separate Ways and the main game. And it's probably the most memorable save room that we've had in years. I'm gonna throw the Mercenaries update here in the positive section because everything they added is pretty awesome. As I mentioned before, the new update comes with a new map, bonus outfits, and loadouts for Leon and Ada, as well as Wesker. To unlock Leon and Ada's alt costumes for Mercenaries, you have to beat all stages with an S with their respective character. If you get an S+ with all characters on all maps, you can actually unlock Leon's RPD outfit. Wesker not only looks like him now, but does actually turn into Johnny Cage when you use his special moves. The new map Docks is a bit of a letdown. It's a rework of the final stage with Sadler, and I was really hoping for Waterworld because that's still to this day one of the most unique maps we've gotten in Mercenaries, with the zip lines, the huge chainsaw dude, and overall it was just a very colorful map that was completely original and not even a location from the main story like Mercenaries maps usually are. But it is an okay map on its own, honestly. I was just really hoping for Waterworld. And this makes a smooth transition into the things that I didn't really like or dislike, just things that could have probably been done better. There's so many areas I was looking for in the main story that they cut for Separate Ways, which is fine, but a lot of the areas were a lot better than the ones that were actually left in the game. I mean, come on, you cut the water tunnels from the main game, which were easily one of the creepiest sections in the original, but left the water room, the most infamous area in the whole series, that's so strongly disliked. I mean, the plus side of this is that it makes the game feel a lot more complete, almost like a 2 full-fledged campaign system, which they failed to do in the RE2 remake. But I didn't want it in 4. 4 already felt complete enough. I just wanted it in the remake of 2. And while on the topic of the waterways, I gotta say, the original was so creepy, and in the remake it's not as creepy, but I still did appreciate that they brought it back anyway. Krauser's second battle in the battleship section from the original are also completely removed, which, to be fair, this campaign made so many original changes that made it stand on its own way more than the original with its own set of bosses, rather than just fighting the same things in the same areas as Leon, with only 1 or 2 minor different areas. Ada's VA, I'm aware of the controversy surrounding her now at this point, from fans going out of their way to harass her, which was really not cool in the slightest. But then her going on a rant about how people are apparently racist against Asians because they didn't like her portrayal. I don't know, for starters, I don't think anyone who's upset over a fictional character called Ada Wong being misrepresented could be painted as racist. I mean, look, let's be real here. Her VA is not the best, but it's nothing to get this worked up over. A lot of her work in the DLC was more than okay, and I honestly didn't even notice most of the time. But that being said, some of her deliveries were still pretty flat, and it feels like they just went with the first take she did and rolled with it. Because there are points her acting is really on point and great. There's other times it just feels like she should have just did it over maybe another once or twice. And I think maybe have been guided better by the emotions the writers were trying to portray. This isn't a shit on her at all in the slightest, and she's a very talented voice actress. I think that's really all that was needed to be done. I think they just needed a little bit more guidance and some more reshoots, and I think it would have been fine. Although overall I still do prefer the original VA, that's not exclusive to Ada either, that's just my preference for most of the voice actors. If anything, I have more of a problem with Leon, but that was already covered in my remake of 4's main story, so I'm not gonna just reiterate everything I said in that. Now the things I don't like. Before I get into this, I always get into trouble with newer RE fans because they don't seem to understand that people are allowed to have different opinions. I am someone who grew up with the original games. I am always going to prefer the original games. I am aware that some of the things I say are going to be considered nitpicky, so just bear with me. I still did very much enjoy the Separate Ways DLC, probably more than you could ever know, but these are just the few things that I think could have really been done better, so yeah, let's get into it. The U3 battle is back, as many suspected, that even though it was cut from the main game, it was going to be in Separate Ways. And it's very weird. Salazar's right-hand man this time turns into said U3 monster after being a pursuer enemy for the early half of the game, which I didn't really feel like the game needed, but it was okay anyway, and it might not be as memorable because the whole puzzle sequence with the cages falling down into the chasm was completely cut. It's just I don't think as good as the original, but the battle itself was still okay. I think this also goes into the bigger problem, though, I mentioned in my review of the main game, where the build-up to the bosses is kind of eh. Like, I mentioned how in the cutscenes of the main game in the remake, the enemies just kind of explode and transform. There's no, like, fleshed out and, you know, detailed transformation sequences anymore. They just kind of explode into their final forms and whatnot. And I think part of the reason the U3 battle was so good in the original is because of that build-up you had beforehand with the cages and it stalking you through the cages as they start to fall down and then only barely escaping. I think it just could have been a little bit better. The new enemy they added was also quite literally useless. It pursues you for a whole 5 minutes and then dies immediately in a quick time event. Although I did like the nice homage to the Evil Within in this section, it just... I don't think it really added much to the game, to be honest. This is probably the most pathetic enemy they've ever added to the series. In between the main story and this, I really don't like how they have the Los Illuminados spouting Christian phrases and terms. In the original, they were a cult, and sure, they still had a church, and Sadler considered himself Lord, but that more seems like the way lords and serfs operated in the Middle Ages and medieval times, not really a reference to Lord as in God. They also had their own phrases and whatnot, but now in the game, Sadler throws around the terms like
Wayward lamb, servant of the heretic wolf. This will be your trial and tribulation.
You have forsaken holy body.
None of that was in the original, and I don't really like that it not only lacks the originality of the original, but it also stoops to using Christian terms. It almost feels like they turned the Los Illuminados into an allegory against organized Christianity, which, I don't know, just seems really out of place and off-putting. And I think with so many other games trying to do this weird allegory, it just is coming across as like really corny and unoriginal, and I would have much preferred them to stick to the lords and serfs kind of theme and the medieval times theme that the original game had. But, you know, it is what it is. It's a modern AAA game. It's gonna have some of this, you know, stuff in it. And even though it is very weird and off-putting, I don't think it does put down the game in any way, or nor does it negate any of the very positive things I've said. Because again, this is also kind of a reach, I'll be totally honest, but it is just one of those things that does rub me the wrong way, so maybe it should have been in the category of things that could have been done better rather than things that I didn't like. But, you know, it's an interesting thing to talk about. To conclude, Separate Ways feels like it really completes the Resident Evil 4 Remake experience. It's still like the main game adds a ton of new areas and places to explore, but unlike the main game, the story beats and overall presentation felt much more in line with the original game. While I would say the remake's main story is still inferior to the original, I would argue the opposite for Separate Ways because of this. My opinion might change with repeated playthroughs, but for now, if I'm being completely honest, I wasn't really a huge fan of the original Separate Ways. Once I would beat it and unlock the Chicago typewriter, I would usually never touch it again. But with this new Separate Ways, I can definitely see myself going back to it again very soon. Thank you guys all for watching, I hope you very much enjoyed. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you agree or disagree with me? Were there certain things you would disagree with, or certain things you agreed with? I don't know, whatever the case is, let me know down below in the comments, I'd love to hear them. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe for more. And that'll be it. Have a nice day.